My mother didn't even look up from her phone when she said it. She just waved one hand at me like she was shooing a fly and told the hotel concierge, "Oh, she's not with us. She's just the driver." 22 years. I had spent 22 years building something she couldn't even be bothered to look at. The concierge's eyes moved from my mother's face to mine, then they dropped to the lanyard around my neck. His expression changed the way weather changes, fast, complete, no warning. He straightened so quickly he nearly knocked the guest registry off the podium. His hand reached for the phone on the desk, and his voice when it came out was 3 registers higher than it had been 30 seconds ago. "Dr. Aldridge, Dr. Harlow Aldridge is here." A pause. Then, louder, "Please notify the Chief of Staff immediately. The keynote speaker has arrived." My mother's hand stopped mid-wave. She turned. For the first time in 22 years, she looked at me, really looked, and found someone she didn't recognize at all. But before I tell you what happened next, and what it cost every person in that lobby to finally see me, you need to understand what 22 years of invisibility actually looks like from the inside. I was 9 years old the first time I understood that I was the wrong kind of child. My mother had lined us up in the kitchen for what she called the weekly report. My brother Tanner was 12, already tall enough that he had to duck under the doorframe light fixture, already broad in the shoulders the way our father had been broad. He went first. Varsity soccer tryouts. Coach said he was a natural. Starting position, probably. My mother clapped her hands together like a child at a birthday party. She turned to the refrigerator and moved a magnet to make room before she'd even seen any paperwork. Then she looked at me. I had a folder. I'd made the folder myself, with a rubber band holding it shut because I didn't have a binder clip. Inside was a letter, typed, formal, addressed to my parents, from the Regional Science and Mathematics Foundation, informing them that their daughter had placed first in the statewide mathematics competition for her age group and was being invited to participate in an advanced accelerated program at the state university the following summer. Full scholarship, transportation included. I held it out. My mother took it with 2 fingers. She read the first sentence, maybe the second. Then she set it on the counter next to the fruit bowl, not on the refrigerator, not with a magnet, and said, "Well, that's very nice. Tanner, tell me more about the coach." The letter sat on the counter for a week. Then it was under the fruit bowl. Then it was gone. I never asked what happened to it. That was the year I learned the shape of my place in this family. I was the one who got things done and got out of the way. Tanner was the one who got celebrated. My mother was a woman who needed an audience, and Tanner gave her one. Every trophy, every game, every girlfriend, every fight, every crisis. Tanner's life was a performance, and my mother was his most devoted viewer. I was the grip crew, essential to the production. Never on stage. I adapted the way you adapt to a cold house. You stop expecting warmth and start generating your own. By high school, I was doing both our college applications. Not because anyone asked me to, because I understood, the way you understand gravity, that this was what was expected. I proofread Tanner's essays. I reminded him of deadlines. I formatted his activity list. He got into a Division I school on a partial athletic scholarship and spent the next 4 years switching majors and accumulating charges on the credit card my mother had co-signed for him. I got a full merit scholarship to a university 3 states away, packed 1 bag, and did not ask for a ride to the airport. Nobody offered one. My mother called me 4 months later, not to ask about classes or dormitories or whether I was eating. She called because Tanner had overdrafted his account and the bank had called the house. Could I cover it, just until things settled down? I was 18 years old, working 20 hours a week in the university's administrative office at $9.50 an hour. I sent $200 because I didn't know how to say no yet. I hadn't learned that word. I had learned how to defer, how to minimize, how to make myself small enough to slide under a door. Saying no felt like a full wall that I didn't know how to build. I built other walls instead. I built them out of biology textbooks and gross anatomy labs, and the kind of focused, solitary pre-dawn studying that turns ordinary students into something else entirely. I graduated summa cum laude. I applied to medical school. I got in. My mother called when I told her. I could hear the television in the background. "Medical school," she said. "That's so long, though. Tanner's already making good money doing sales. You could probably get a nice office job with your degree." I said, "I'm going." She said, "Well, don't expect us to come to every graduation." They didn't come to any of them. The bleeding started before I finished my residency. I want to be precise about that, because it matters. I was still in training, still earning next to nothing, still eating rice and canned beans in a studio apartment with a window that didn't seal properly, when my mother called about Tanner's first real crisis. He'd lost the sales job. Security deposit on a new apartment was due. Could I help? Just this once? I sent $800 from my emergency fund. 3 months later, his car payment. 6 months after that, the cable bill, the cell phone bill, a medical copay my mother described as an emergency that turned out to be a dermatology appointment. By the time I was a third-year surgical resident, I had a spreadsheet. Not because I'm organized by nature, I am, but that's not why. I made the spreadsheet because I had begun to suspect that the total was going to be something I needed to see clearly, all at once, to actually believe. I was right. By the time I finished residency, I had transferred $34,000 to my family across 7 years. In cash, in Venmo payments, in wire transfers, in checks I hand-delivered at holidays so they could be cashed discreetly without my name attached. $34,000 earned on a resident's salary. That is not a small number. That is someone choosing to go without so other people can have. The worst part wasn't the money. The money was a wound I could manage. The worst part was that they didn't know. They never asked what I was doing to earn it. My mother told her book club that her daughter was a doctor. She said it once. She never said what kind, what specialty, what it had taken to get there. When her friends asked follow-up questions, she changed the subject back to Tanner, who was now calling himself a regional business development consultant, which meant he had a business card and a leased BMW and no clients. My mother loved that BMW. She talked about it at dinner parties. She had never been inside my operating room. I completed a fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery at a hospital in Houston. Cardiac surgery, the inside of the chest, the stopped heart, the bypass machine, the 4-minute window in which a person is technically not alive while you repair what's broken and then bring them back. That is not a metaphor. That is a Tuesday. I was 41 years old, operating on people's hearts, and my mother still introduced me at family events as my daughter the doctor, the way you'd say my daughter, she works downtown. I had stopped correcting her. I had stopped a lot of things by then, but I hadn't yet stopped the money, and that was the mistake that was going to cost me the next 3 years to fully untangle. The moment I understood that something had to change arrived at 6:47 in the morning, in the middle of a 12-hour shift that was going on 14. When my scrub nurse passed me my personal cell phone because my mother had called the hospital's main line and told the operator it was a family emergency, I stepped into the hallway. I had just finished closing a patient whose heart I had stopped, repaired, and restarted. My hands still had the particular steadiness that comes after a long procedure, the controlled calm of someone who has been running on precision for hours. My mother's voice on the phone was not calm. Tanner had put a deposit down on a vacation property rental in Scottsdale, a destination birthday party for his wife. 40 guests. Catering, DJ, the whole arrangement. The check had bounced. The venue was threatening to cancel. Could I wire $5,000 before noon? I stood in that hospital hallway in surgical scrubs and heard myself ask a question I had not planned to ask. I heard it come out of my mouth like it had been waiting behind a door for a long time. Does Tanner know what I just finished doing? My mother paused. What? I was just in a 12-hour surgery. I've been here since yesterday evening. Does he know that? Did either of you think to ask? Another pause. Shorter this time. Emily, this is urgent. Can you help or not? I told her I would call her back. I put the phone in my coat pocket. I walked to the break room, poured the worst coffee in the building into a paper cup, and sat down on a plastic chair. I sat there for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock above the microwave, and I thought about the fact that I had just restarted a human heart. And the first thing that reached me from my family was a request for party venue money. I did not wire $5,000 that day. I sent $500 and told her it was all I had available. It was a lie. I had more. But something had shifted during those 11 minutes. Some hinge had turned, and for the first time in 22 years, I did not send everything they asked for. It was a small lie. But it was the first thing I had ever held back, and it felt like the first breath after being underwater. The invitation arrived at my mother's house because I had never updated my address with the conference's medical board. My fault, technically, though I'd been telling myself for 3 years that I needed to handle it and never had. The invitation was on heavy cream cardstock with the organization's seal embossed in navy blue on the upper left corner. Inside, in printed typeface that left no room for ambiguity, Dr. Harlow Aldridge, MD, FAs, guest of honor and keynote speaker, Annual American Cardiothoracic Surgery Symposium. This was not a small conference, 1,200 surgeons, researchers from Johns Hopkins, Mayo, Stanford. The kind of event where people give papers that change how medicine is practiced for the next decade. I had been selected because 18 months earlier, I had co-developed a modified surgical approach to aortic repair that reduced average bypass time by 11 minutes and, in a peer-reviewed study published in the New England Journal of Medicine, corresponded with a statistically significant reduction in postoperative mortality for high-risk patients. People were alive who would not have been alive. That was the reason for the invitation. My mother found the envelope in her mailbox on a Tuesday. She called me that afternoon to tell me she'd thrown it out. Some kind of medical junk mail addressed to you, she said. I didn't want it cluttering up the entry table. I asked her what it said on the envelope. Something about a surgery conference. Very official looking, but those things are always trying to sell you something. I drove to her house the next morning. I went to the recycling bin. The envelope was there, damp along one edge, slightly crumpled. I opened it in her driveway, read it standing up, with dew still on the car hood. When I went inside, my mother was making coffee. She glanced at the envelope. "What is that?" "It's an invitation to keynote a national surgical conference," I said. "They want me to deliver the opening address." She looked at me the way you look at something that doesn't quite parse. "A speech? You'd have to talk in front of all those people." She turned back to the coffee maker. "I didn't know you were comfortable with that kind of thing." I stood in her kitchen, holding an invitation to speak in front of 1,200 of the most accomplished surgeons in the country, and listened to my mother question whether I was comfortable talking in front of people. What happened next was something I am not proud of. Not because I did something wrong, because of how long it took me to do something right. She was on the phone with Tanner 20 minutes later. I heard the conversation from the hallway. She had gotten tickets to the conference gala through her dentist's wife, who was on the hospital foundation's auxiliary board, and had purchased two through a charity auction. She had been planning, she explained, to take Tanner so he could make connections with medical professionals, network, maybe land a consulting contract with a hospital system. I heard her say, "It'll be perfect for him, all the right people in one room." She came back into the kitchen. Before I could say anything, she held up one finger. "We're going to the gala too. Tanner thinks it could lead to something." She looked me over, the specific look she had been giving me my entire life, the one that measured and found insufficient. "You can come if you want, but wear something that blends in. I don't want Tanner to have to explain who you are to everyone he meets." I drove home. I stood in my closet for a long time. Then I called the conference organizer and confirmed my attendance. On the evening of the gala, I did not wear my white coat. I did not wear the name badge I'd been mailed with my title and specialty printed below my name in bold. I wore a dark dress. I put my hospital ID, the one with the department chief designation and my photo and the gold caduceus seal in the upper right corner, in my bag under my wallet where it would not be visible unless someone specifically asked for it. My mother's dentist's wife had arranged the transportation. I sat in the back seat of a hired car between my mother and Tanner's wife, whose name was Shelley, while Tanner sat up front and talked about a new healthcare innovation consulting practice he was launching. He named 3 hospital CEOs he claimed to have relationships with. He described a contract he said was in negotiation. He used the phrase 7-figure potential twice. I watched the city pass outside the window and said nothing. The gala was at the Marriott Marquis downtown, the ballroom that takes up most of the second floor. I had attended 3 previous events there. I knew the registration desk was staffed by the conference's administrative team, and I knew that my name would be at the top of the guest list in a category separate from general attendees. My mother swept up to the registration desk like she owned the property. She gave her name, then Tanner's. The woman behind the desk found them, smiled professionally, handed over 2 lanyards. General admission. Table 47. Then she looked past my mother at me. "And your name?" My mother turned slightly the way you turn toward an afterthought. "She's just our +1. We can vouch for her, she's family." The woman at the desk didn't look at my mother, she looked at me. "Your name, ma'am?" "Harlow Aldridge," I said. The woman's eyes went to her screen, then back to me, then to her screen again. Something in her posture changed. Not dramatically, not a full stop, but a subtle recalibration, the way a compass needle moves when it finds north. She picked up the phone receiver on her desk. Her voice was low and professional, but it carried. "Dr. Aldridge has arrived at registration. Please notify Dr. Fontaine and the program committee." She hung up, reached below the desk, and produced a lanyard that was a different color from the 2 she'd just handed my mother. Gold border. Not a general admission badge. She held it out to me with both hands. "Dr. Aldridge, we've been expecting you. Your escort will be here in just a moment. Can I get you anything while you wait?" The lobby went quiet the way a room goes quiet when something unexpected happens. Not silent, just recalibrated. My mother's hand, which had been resting on the registration desk, went still. Tanner stopped mid-sentence. I heard it, the exact moment the sentence stopped having a next word. I took the lanyard. I didn't put it on yet. I held it. The escort arrived in under 90 seconds. He was a resident I recognized from the conference's organizing committee, young, efficient, clearly briefed. He shook my hand with both of his and said, "Dr. Aldridge, the program director asked me to bring you to the reception suite. The other keynote speakers have been asking about you." I turned to my mother. I want to be honest about this moment. I did not feel triumph. I felt something older and quieter than triumph. I felt the thing you feel when you've been holding your breath for 22 years and you finally just stop. "I'll find you at dinner," I said. I turned and walked away. The reception suite was on the mezzanine level. I met the other keynote speakers. I had a glass of water. I had a conversation with a researcher from Cleveland Clinic about her work on minimally invasive valve repair that I will think about for a long time. It was the first time in years I had stood in a room and not had to make myself smaller than I was. 40 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened. I have been in that room before, but I have never entered it the way I entered it that night. The program director, a woman named Dr. Fontaine, who had published foundational research on cardiac bypass protocols and who had been, at different points in her career, both my professor and my colleague, walked in beside me. The room was already full, 1,200 people, give or take, in formal wear and white coats. When the announcer said my name and my title, the room rose, not politely, not individually, together. The sound of it, chairs on marble, the shift of air, a ripple of applause building. I wasn't prepared for it, even though I should have been. I stopped at the edge of the stage for half a second, just half a second, and I breathed. From the stage, I could see the whole room. Table 47 was near the left wall, partially behind a floral arrangement. My mother was sitting with her hands in her lap, not clapping, because she was, I think, not yet certain what was happening. Tanner had his phone out, face down, and he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at the projection screen behind me, where my photograph and credentials were displayed in text 3 feet tall. Dr. Harlow Aldridge, MD, FA's Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, Guest of Honor. I did not look at them after that. I turned to the podium. I spoke about the night I first understood what it meant to hold a stopped heart in my hands and trust that I could start it again. I spoke about the residents I had trained, and the ones who had taught me things I hadn't known I needed to learn. I spoke about the patients whose names I remember, and the ones whose faces I still see in that particular way. You see things that have been pressed into you by weight and time. I spoke about the study, and what the data meant, and what I hoped the next iteration would show. And then, near the end, I let myself say the thing I had not planned to say. I said that the hardest part of doing work that asks everything of you is returning to spaces where what you've given means nothing. That some of us have spent years becoming invisible on purpose because visibility in the wrong rooms costs too much. That the question isn't whether you deserve to be seen. You do, you always did. The question is whether you're finally ready to stop standing outside the frame. I did not look at table 47. I didn't need to. The applause when I finished was the kind that starts before the last word is done. After the formal program, a colleague I'd known since fellowship, a thoracic surgeon named Dr. Reese, who had the specific gift of saying things that land like a surgical instrument on a steel tray, clean and unavoidable, stopped me in the corridor outside the ballroom. She looked at me for a moment with her arms crossed. You rode here with your family. It wasn't a question. Yes! And they introduced you to the registration desk as their +1, my mother did. She nodded slowly. I watched that from across the lobby. She uncrossed her arms and put one hand on the wall beside her, not blocking me, just steadying herself. Harlow, you published in the New England Journal. You just addressed 1,200 surgeons. You are responsible for 11 minutes that, compounded across every OR in this country that adopts your approach, will translate into thousands of lives. And you are riding in hired cars and sitting in passenger seats while your mother tells hotel staff you're nobody. I opened my mouth. She held up a hand. I'm not asking for an explanation. I know the explanation. I have a version of the same explanation. What I'm asking you is this. At what point does the cost of keeping people comfortable become a cost you can no longer afford to pay? I didn't have an answer, but the question followed me out of the building. I took a cab home alone. I did not tell my mother I was leaving. I texted her the cab company's name in case she needed the number. In the cab, I opened the Notes app on my phone, and I did something I'd been postponing for a long time. I made a list, not of grievances, not of amounts. A list of what I had spent the last 22 years funding, and what that funding had and hadn't bought. I had bought Tanner 4 years of a lifestyle he hadn't earned and wouldn't have known how to build. I had bought my mother the ability to maintain a social image, the dinners, the book club events, the charity luncheons, that required income she did not have. I had bought myself continued membership in a family that did not know what I did for a living and had never asked. What I had not bought was any form of being seen. At home, sitting at my kitchen table with the kitchen light too bright and the city too quiet, I opened my banking app. I had set up automatic transfers 18 months ago at my mother's request. A monthly amount to her household account, a quarterly amount to a business account Tanner had asked me to fund while he got the new venture off the ground. The venture was now 14 months old and had not yet produced a single contract. I canceled the automatic transfer to my mother's account. I canceled the quarterly transfer to Tanner's business account. I wrote an email. I don't write emails that way, measured, unemotional, by accident. I write them that way because I write surgical notes, because in my professional life, every word is load-bearing. The email said, simply, that all financial support was ending effective immediately, that this was not a negotiation, and that I hoped we could eventually have a relationship built on something other than the assumption that my silence and my money were the same resource. I attached nothing. I sent it. Then I went to sleep at 2 a.m. and woke up at 5:15 to get to the hospital because that's the job, and the job does not pause for the things that have to happen in the night. The response was immediate and multi-layered. Tanner called at 7 a.m. I was scrubbing in. He left a voicemail that used the word betrayal 4 times and the word family 6 times and contained zero acknowledgement that any money had ever changed hands. His wife Shelley sent a text that was more specific and therefore more honest. She said that the automatic transfer cancellation had triggered an overdraft on their joint account, that 2 automatic bill payments had failed, and that she needed me to fix this by the end of the week. She did not ask. She stated it as an outcome I was responsible for producing. My mother called at 9:15 while I was between procedures. I did not answer. She called again at 11. I did not answer. She called a third time at 1:30 p.m. and left a voicemail in a voice I did not immediately recognize. Low, stripped, the particular quality of a voice that has been crying in a car for an hour. I listened to it twice. She said that she had gotten a call from the gas company, that the automatic payment on her account had declined, that she'd had to call the card company, and they had told her the funding account had been closed to her access. She said she didn't understand what was happening. She said she was scared. She said she was sorry. That last part, the sorry, landed differently than I expected it to. I had been anticipating anger. I had been prepared for the full arsenal: guilt, obligation, blame, the invocation of my father's memory, the suggestion that I was selfish and cruel and had always been the difficult one. What I had not prepared for was a small, honest, stripped-down sorry from a voice that sounded old in a way it hadn't sounded the night before. I did not call back that day. I needed to sit with it long enough to know whether it was a tactic or something else. 3 weeks later, my mother asked if she could come to my apartment, just to talk, not to ask for anything. She said that last part like she knew how much work it was going to take to make me believe it. I said yes. She sat at my kitchen table and did not ask for anything. She sat there for a while without saying anything at all, which was unprecedented in my memory. My mother had never in my life failed to fill silence. She had a horror of quiet. She filled it with Tanner's achievements, her social calendar, the opinions of her book club, the relative merits of various people she knew. Silence was a room she could not sit in. She sat in it that day, for almost 4 minutes. Then she said, I watched the video from the conference, the one they posted online. I've watched it 3 times. I didn't say anything. You were talking about being invisible on purpose. She pressed her palms flat on the table. Were you talking about us? Yes, I said. She looked at her hands. I didn't know what you did. I knew you were a surgeon, but I didn't understand what that meant, what it actually meant. She paused. Tanner explained the research to me, the study. He looked it up. He didn't tell me what he found, but he looked it up, and afterward he didn't talk for the rest of the evening. I watched her. I threw away a letter that said, Guest of Honor. I called you a +1 in front of people you work with. I asked you for a Porsche deposit. She stopped. It wasn't a Porsche, but it might as well have been. I asked you for money I didn't need and didn't earn while you were. She stopped again, breathed. I don't know what I was doing while you were doing what you were doing. I don't know how to hold both of those things in my head at the same time. I said, you don't have to. You just have to hold what's true now. She raised her eyes. They were red at the rims. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know that's not how this works. I'm asking you to tell me if there is any version of this where I get to know you. The real you. Not the person I made myself believe you were because it was easier than paying attention. I looked at my mother across my kitchen table. She was 63 years old, and she looked, at that moment, like someone who had walked through a wall she hadn't known was there and found a different room on the other side than she'd expected. I said, there is a version of that. But it starts with you understanding that I am not responsible for holding this family together by myself. That was never my job. It was never fair, and I should have said so 20 years ago. If we build something from here, it's built differently or it's not built. She nodded. Once. Small. The nod of someone agreeing to terms they know are reasonable and know they should have offered themselves. Tanner called 2 months later. He did not call to ask for money. That alone was so unusual I almost didn't recognize the conversation for what it was. He said he'd been thinking. He said he knew the business account situation had been, his word was unfair. He said he'd been trying to build things on a foundation that wasn't his to use. He said he was going to close the LLC, go get an actual job. He had applied to 3 positions. He had an interview lined up. I did not tell him I was proud of him. I said, I hope the interview goes well. That was enough. It turned out that was exactly the right amount. The following spring, my mother came to the hospital, not to ask for anything, not in a crisis. She came because she had found, while cleaning out a storage closet in her house, a folder from when I was 9 years old. Inside it, a printout from the State Mathematics Foundation. A letter addressed to my parents. First place, statewide, her daughter's name printed at the top in a font she said she hadn't seen in 30 years. She had framed it, inexpensive frame from a craft store, but straight level, the glass clean. She handed it to me in the hospital lobby with both hands and said, "I should have put this on the refrigerator." I held it for a moment. My mother was not a woman built for apology. She was not built for sitting in silence or for admitting she had looked in the wrong direction for 30 years, while the right direction was standing 3 feet away, holding a folder with a rubber band around it. She was not built for any of the things she had done in the last 6 months. She had done them anyway. That doesn't repair everything. I want to be honest about that. Some losses are too old and too deep to be repaired by a framed certificate and a changed phone demeanor. There are Thanksgivings I can't get back. There are versions of me: the 9-year-old with the folder, the 18-year-old who drove herself to the airport, the 32-year-old sending money from a resident's salary, that nobody is going to be able to reach back and take care of retroactively. But there is also this. The morning after she brought me the frame, I walked into an operating room, stood at a table, put my hands inside a chest cavity, and brought someone back from a stopped heart. I did what I had spent 22 years building the skill to do. And for the first time, I didn't have to lock a single door inside myself to get there. I had spent 2 decades performing a version of love that wasn't love at all. It was management. Managing my family's comfort, managing their image, managing their finances, keeping everything running smoothly enough that nobody ever had to look directly at what was actually happening. That kind of management isn't kindness. It's a way of staying safe while calling it sacrifice. I had stopped being safe. I had let them see me. And the ceiling hadn't come down. The lesson I paid for in blood and early mornings and 11-minute studies published in journals my mother had never heard of was not that silence is strength. It is not. Silence is only useful when it's chosen, when it's the space you hold deliberately before you say the thing that changes everything. What I had been doing was different. I had been silent the way a room is silent when all the air has been taken out of it. I don't do that anymore. If any part of this found you, if you've ever handed someone your whole life on a platter and watched them set it on the counter next to the fruit bowl without reading it, then you already know the thing I had to learn the hard way. The people who are supposed to love you don't get to define the size of the space you're allowed to take up. You were never the plus one, you were always the whole event.